Hey Kelsey, it's Patty, and here I am with Kelsey's math problem number 3, tutoring. So there's 2 different problems we're going to work on, and I'll take them one at a time. So the first one, for both you're given the same equation. Height equals negative 16t, t is time, plus 61t plus 4. And this is the equation that represents the height. The height in relation to how long since the ball has been thrown in the air. I think that's the question. How long since something has gone up in the air and back down. And so the first one asks you, what would the height be after 2.3 seconds? So to do that, we're going to plug in 2.3 for the t in this equation. So the h, height, is the unknown. So we'll do negative 16. And then remember, this squared only applies to this t. It doesn't also apply to this coefficient. It would only apply to both if there are parentheses around them, and there's not. So according to math rules, it only applies to the t. So we'll put negative 16 on the outside the parentheses, and then I'll put the 2.3 seconds inside the parentheses. And then next we have plus 61 times 2.3 seconds plus 4. And so now the first thing I'm going to do in this problem is I'm going to take care of this parentheses and multiply 2.3 times 2.3, which is 2.3 squared. So I have h equals negative 16. I used my calculator ahead of time, and I got 5.29 as an answer. And then I'll just bring this over just to keep it neat and clean. 2.3 plus 4. Now I'm going to take care of this parenthesis by multiplying these two together and then multiplying these two together. And you'll remember, if you have a negative times a positive, it's a negative number. So negative 16 times 5.29. I did this ahead of time. I got negative 84.64. And then 61 times 2.3 is 140.3 plus 4. Then I'm going to add these together. So if I have a negative plus a positive, then I'm going to add these two together and then subtract that one, because this is the negative. If I moved them around, because you can, when they're adding things together, you can move them around. If I moved this one to the end, it would look like this. I'd do the 140.3 plus 4 minus 84.64. And if I plug all that into my calculator, I get the height equals 59.66. And then it asks for the height to 2 decimal places right there. And then the height, we're told, is being, in the original problem, talks about feet. So the answer is, at 2.3 seconds, the item is 59.66 feet in the air. That's the height. So that is problem number 1. That was the easier of the 2 problems. Now let's talk about the second section. So we'll take that same equation. The height equals negative 16t squared. Can you still see it? Okay, yeah, good. Plus 61t plus 4. So now this question asks you how long before the ball hits the ground. So you'll know that when the ball hits the ground, the height is actually 0, because it's 0 feet in the air is on the ground. So I'll put 0 in for there, and it asks you how long, so it's asking for the t. If I plug in 0 for this variable, what does it make this variable? So I have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 61t plus 4. This is not a nice, neat quadratic equation where I could just kind of do some multiplying and adding kind of skills to solve it. It's kind of messy if you try to do that. And so the quickest way to get the answer, actually the only way to get the answer without using like a calculator, or not a calculator, like a computer, would be to use the quadratic equation. And do you remember the quadratic equation? It is to find these t's. You would use the quadratic equation and think of, this is A, this is B, and this is C. And the quadratic equation says the answer, when this is 0, is, where should I write it? I'll do it here. Negative b plus or minus, this should look familiar, square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So whenever you have a quadratic equation, quadratic meaning that the highest exponent, the highest power is 2, you're going to have 2 answers. So this is because there's a 2 here and that's the highest exponent. We're going to have 2 answers for this. And those 2 answers are signified by this one. It'll be this number plus this number over this number. It will be one answer, and the other answer will be this number minus this number over this number. When you think about time, time is linear and can only go forward. So if we're going to likely get a negative answer and a positive answer. And because it's time, it can only be a positive into the future. Then we'll ignore the negative answer. And so we'll just get one positive answer, which will say how long after we throw the item that it lands and is at height 0. Just think, after you do this, you'll be able to send rockets up to the moon. This is how they do it. All right, so let's look at what A is and B is and C is, and let's plug it into this equation. So B is 61, but it needs to be negative. So negative 61 plus or minus square root. It's going to be a long one. B squared. B is 61. 61 squared minus 4 times A, which is negative 16, times C, which is 4. The whole thing over 2 times negative 16. 2 times negative 16. All right. What I always like to do is I always like to start with what's under the parentheses, and let's get that as simplified as possible, or what's under the square root. So let's just work on this. So if I put 61 times 61 into a calculator, I get 3,721. Minus, if I have a positive number and a negative number and a positive number, this is going to give me a negative answer, right? Because positive times negative is going to be negative. So if I do 4 times negative 16 times 4, I get negative 256. So that's under this exponent, or why do I keep saying exponent? Under the square root symbol. So let's simplify this further before we go anymore. So keep in mind, we're just looking at this. If I have minus a negative, it becomes a positive. So I can rewrite it as 3721 plus 256. And for that, I get 3,977. And that's under my square root. So I'm going to put the square root symbol back there. And I'm going to put this into my calculator. And the answer I get is 63.06. And I did that to 2 decimal places because the answer is going to be in 2 decimal places. When you do this in a calculator, you'll get a longer, but we're just going to do just to 2 decimal places. All right, so now we've taken care of this. So now let's take care of this and put it back in the equation. So this is now this. 63.06 is that part. All right, so negative 61, forget that. Negative 61 plus or minus 63.06 over 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. All right, we're almost there. So I have this is 2 different numbers. One of the equations is negative 61 plus 63.06 over negative 32. And the other one is negative 61 minus 63.06 over negative 32. All right, so what happens if I add these 2 together? Negative 61 plus 63.06. It's kind of the same as saying 63.06 minus 61. So I'm going to get 2.06, and it's over negative 32. If you have a positive on the top and negative on the bottom, it just makes this whole fraction negative. So my answer right now is going to be negative 2.06 over 32. But remember what I said at the beginning? that you can't have a negative for time, and this is a negative answer. So this is the answer that does not apply to this word problem. If you were just asked to find the two answers to this fraction would be one of the two answers, and we would simplify it more. But because it's negative, I'm not going to even bother working on that to make it look prettier. I'm going to leave it that way. It's negative. It's not our answer. Now let's look at this one. We have negative 61 minus 63.06. The way to figure this out is just think about your number line. You're all the way to the far to the left at negative 61, and you're going to move even further, 63.06. So you can add these two together and just put a negative symbol on it, and you get negative 124.06 over negative 32. If I have a negative on the top and negative on the bottom, they cancel each other out. So it gives me 124.06 divided by 32. If I put that in my calculator, I get the answer 3.87. So that's the answer right there, 3.87. It's to 2 decimal places. And what's my units? Seconds. So the height is 0, 3.87 seconds after our objects start moving. So anyway, I know that's complicated with lots of positives and negatives. If you can keep everything separate, so like ignore, this is an important one right here, ignore that negative and just solve these. And you get a negative number, and that's where you get this minus negative, and then you know that it's positive. So that's an easy place to mess up. This here, this one and this one, that's another easy place to mess up if you're not very good with keeping track of your positives and negatives. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let me know if there's anything else I can do, if you want further explanation for any part of it. All right, love you, friend. Talk to you later.